Now, those of you who have watched a few videos on this channel probably know that I am a bit of a fan of monster clay, or at least what it's like to work with. And this was my first ever monster clay creation when I dabbled with it, and then I dived into something a little more substantial. This was a sculpture that took me about 4.5 days. But getting lost in that sculpture and creative process was really fun, and it also made it a little more embarrassing when after all that work, it became really apparent he had a pole up his bum. But I've only ever worked with one kind of monster clay. This is the medium monster clay. It comes in soft and hard as well, and the medium is, well, as you can imagine, is right in the middle. Right out of this box, even though it's medium, you'll see that it's quite hard to work with immediately. Like, you wouldn't sculpt with it as it is. You actually heat it up in the microwave, you soften it, and you work with it from there. I started off with having sort of a structure in place. Sometimes it's an armature, sometimes people use tin foil or whatever. Basically, you don't need to, or particularly want to, fill out the whole thing with the monster clay, so it saves you some extra clay and also gives you a bit of solidity, especially when you're working on the softer stages of the clay. So when it was all soft in the microwave, it sort of goes down almost like a sloppy mud. It feels really smooth, it's quite waxy, and then over time it dries. You can still apply it as it's a little firmer, but the process of working with this stuff, at least the medium stuff that I'm now more used to, sort of evolves as you work with it. The guys who make this stuff saw that video and sent me some prototype monster clay. And that's what we're gonna have a look at today. So I haven't seen or used any of this stuff, and let me just say right up front, they haven't sponsored this video, and this isn't a paid advertisement. I just wanna give my honest impressions and actually explore using this material in its different forms. So in this video, I really just wanna have a just totally raw look at this stuff. I've never looked at it, heard about it, or seen it before I have it in my hands now. Give you an honest impression as to the differences between them, what my favorites are, and then once we've had a really bit of a rough explore of all of these, I actually want to do a couple of zombie sculptures. We'll get to that in a moment. Let's start off with the monster clay gray, because this is obviously a territory I'm more familiar with. Oh, they have the hardnesses on the back, and they're unmarked. I don't know what it is. All right, let's open this up. I'm just gonna take a bit of my medium clay and compare it to this medium clay. I'm gonna guess medium. These feel like super solid in their hardened form. So I'm gonna put this in a container, microwave it, come back with it in its softened form, and we'll go from there. And after 1.5 minutes in the microwave, a bit of a monstery soup. So no surprises here, this is already what I'm used to with the other kind of monster clay. It feels like it has the same viscosity like a milkshake. I'm gonna put this to the side here, let it set a little bit while we have a little bit of a look at this stuff. Ooh, it's oven baked clay. Ooh, I'm curious as to how close this is to working with the monster clay. Ooh, this has a thing. Medium firm, 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 medium firm. Okay, these are all the same. Awesome. What about this? Medium soft, extra firm. I got a whole variety we can explore today. Medium soft, oven baked CosClay. CosClay, fantastic flexible plastic. Make it, bake it, flex it. Hey, they're kickstarting. By the time this video comes out, their Kickstarter will be live. What is this? The future of clay is flexible. For endless applications, this includes stop motion characters, posable figures, and much, much more. How bendy is this stuff? I have to like oven bake it all to sort of see what the outcome is of these. Just try and work it with my hands. Twist it. Bop it, pull it. All right, it's softening. You don't microwave polymer clay, you roll it. Hello, old friend. Let's start rolling. All right.
3 weeks later.
This is starting to feel a lot smoother, much more malleable, as you can see. Let's try out the extra firm CosClay. Oh boy, that is extra firm. Ha! Whoa. I'm not sure that's how you meant to soften it. Maybe you just gotta keep going.
1 eternity later.
Okay, so at this stage I think I've run it through about 30 or 40 times, and as you can see, it is actually sculptable now. I think the answer is the hard stuff you gotta condition, because what I'm gonna do next is bake each of these types of clay, but also sculpt, directly comparing the monster clay to this new CosClay stuff. And I'm also gonna work from the same foundation. This is an anatomical skull that is produced by fellow art YouTuber and friend Proko, or Stan Prokopenko. This is a really cool anatomical human skull with a magnetized removable lower jaw. And because he sent me two, I'm actually going to use these as a base to sculpt on. These are anatomical skulls, therefore it's a great foundation for me to put the material onto to create a bit of a zombie. And of course we can go through and show the bones and stuff underneath to make it look nice and gnarly. One awesome feature about this thing, which is super noteworthy, is the fact that the jaw is separate and magnetized, which means you can do this.
Yes, that's right, He-Man. I am going to take over the world.
It's also good for professional stuff too. So the first order of business was, like I mentioned, to make a simple test of strength and flexibility of the different grades of CosClay. Now, you saw how tricky the hard grade was to condition, but to roll up and make the same coil out of the soft clay, as you can see here, required little to no conditioning at all. So how did the medium grade go? Well, I guess at the end of the day, I'm realizing what this stuff is. It's just polymer clay with a twist. The twist, of course, will be the outcome and how it hardens after baking, which remains to be seen, but the process of conditioning the CosClay to be workable was pretty similar to working with polymer clay, which I'd done before, if just a little extra crumbly to start out with. Half a drop of oil and a few dozen passes through the roller and you're on the way to being good to go. So my 3 coils of conditioning were ready to bake, and I threw them in a tray and sent them off to the cooker. But now it's time to get serious, and I'm going to start off in familiar territory with a medium grade monster clay, but this time in the new grey variation. I softened it up and made the first thin layer over the skull to work on. Now, I did initially say I wanted to make zombies, but the more clay I added to the skull, the more I enjoyed the fact that working on the skull base actually gave me really accurate facial proportions as I sculpted. So I kind of wanted to just sculpt more of a normal looking face rather than have it show through too much of the bones and skull underneath. I kind of felt like those guys in CSI who recreate the face of a victim with the anatomy of the skull to show what the victim looked like, but I don't want to disappoint you, so I will do a monster, and I promised a Halloween-esque sort of monster, so I thought I should at least stick to that, and in doing so, I decided to go in a more, shall we say, Transylvanian direction. As the rough mass of my sculpture was building up to a place I was happy with and the clay was hardening, I started to shave back and refine the surface of the face, but then with the proportions and the facial pose solidifying, I attacked the sculpture with a heat gun to soften the harsher looking areas and generally smooth it out, so I could then go in, clean up the skin and slowly add in the details. I gotta say, I kind of love that the skull base and then the grey clay are almost identical colours. I mean, I didn't even have to sculpt the teeth, which already look so perfect in detail, and it also meant that in adding the finishing touch of the vampire fangs, it looked like it was always meant to work that way. Don't you just love those happy accidents? So I'm just trying to stick to that slightly spooky theme. Are you spooked out yet? Now onto trying the CosClay on the same skull base. But before I could start sculpting, I had to condition the clay to be workable. Now I learnt about this when I first played with polymer clay, that the stuff is really quite dry and hard out of the packet, or if it hasn't been used for a while, it's pretty normal for the polymer clay to need to be conditioned. And I admit that I did find this a little more difficult and time consuming to condition than your average polymer clay. Not the worst in the world, but definitely a time-consuming, necessary first step. Running it through the roller again and again and again and again, and I am now officially motivated to buy an electric pasta roller to do this crap for me! Forgive all the shouting. But when it was finally done, I started applying the clay to the skull, creating an outer layer of skin and thickening up the hollows of the cheeks and building out the mouth and brows. This was slow going and definitely more time consuming than the monster clay. And I have to say, in the earlier stages of building up the mass, I felt some pretty heavy pros and cons. This stuff was really tough to work in and build up, and made me really miss that liquefiable state of monster clay, and the process took a lot longer with less room to just play around with the mass and shape. Pro, obviously there's a more permanent result if you bake it, and the more I added and worked with this stuff, the more cool I realized that fleshy color and slightly waxy looking surface was, making it pretty clear that realistic monsters and figures in this stuff would look incredibly cool, and that's my impression before baking it, which I guess we'll discover what that is later. Now, the more I refined the base of the skin of this dude, the more I started to love how the CosClay worked, and with the fleshy colour and waxy surface as it is, it's like I was literally sculpting the face of a hideous monster. And where previously I found myself wanting to break away from making a zombie with the monster clay, here with the CosClay I actually found myself wanting to come back to making a zombie, because I guess I wanted to see how the textures and the rotting aesthetic would look on the CosClay when baked and compared to my first monster clay sculpture, which of course is also a zombie, but also because I wanted to sculpt flesh that looked like it would be falling apart and have some layers to it, so that after baking it I could see how this flexible hardening feature it boasts actually works out in practice. It was painstaking as my initial conditioning and early sculpture process was. The later refinement stages of the process were an absolute delight. In fact, sculpting the details and smoothing the skin, making gnarly cuts and gashes, that process really started. So now that we've had a really solid play with everything, it's time to have a look at everything and just see what the final thoughts are. And let's start off with the monster clay. Now, obviously this was my first ever monster clay sculpt in the commonly known monster clay color. This was my sculpt in the monster clay gray. Now, I don't think it's a huge deal, the difference in colour, but at the same time, it is refreshing because I have seen this monster clay colour pretty much everywhere, and it is synonymous with that concept character sculpting. It's sort of cool in that way, but also sometimes it might not benefit the aesthetic that you're going for, even if you're just trying to convey a concept. Now, obviously, in this case, the skull underneath was almost an identical colour, and as I mentioned, it's perfect in that way because it sort of blends in with the actual clay sculpture that I have. But also, as a final sculpture, it almost looks cleaner and clearer because it's lighter in tone. So if you're looking for something to feel a bit brighter conceptually, or to not have such color saturation, maybe the gray is the way you might want to go. But I really do like that gray unsaturated aesthetic, and it does make me want to try doing a bigger, more epic sculpture with the monster clay gray. So that is the monster clay. Time to move on to the CosClay. Starting off with our little baked test here, we have the soft CosClay, the medium CosClay, and the hard CosClay. Conditioning these clays was easy, hard, nearly impossible. Not a fun process, but let's see what the baked result is like. Starting off with the soft CosClay. Okay, that feels firmer than I expected. Wow, I am surprised this hasn't broken. Extra points there for coolness. I'm wondering if, as the original clays get firmer, if the baked result gets firmer, sorta, a little bit. Still really solid. I am actually really impressed. That is really strong. That's our baked sampling, and I am actually really thoroughly impressed by that. So let's see how the full project ended up baking. Okay, I've kept it covered so that I would give you my honest and immediate reaction. This is genuinely really cool. Though this is more difficult to work with, the fact that you can make it, I mean, this is durable. Like, I can bend his ears and I'm not worried about them breaking off. Look at this. These are the folds of flesh that are overhanging, and I'm not worried about that peeling off or chipping or breaking. I made something that would, in theory, be delicate, but when baked, it does not feel delicate. I mean, you can even see this upper lip was sculpted to be quite split, and pulling on that isn't dislodging it at all. This is a dragon I painted and sculpted in a traditional polymer clay, and it's held up well. It's pretty durable, but I also haven't tested it or pushed it, and even just touching it now a little bit actually just chipped off. It's interesting because if I sculpted this in the CosClay, I would feel confident pulling the tail or even the wings around. So as far as first impressions goes for my use of the CosClay, the result is amazing. The sculpting process, like I mentioned, and the conditioning in particular, there are definitely some tedious aspects to that, but when you get along to the refinement element of it, it really becomes a lot of fun to work with. And the result, like the baked, durable, rubbery, but still solid outcome, I mean, that is wild. I had a lot of fun making these dudes in today's video. Wildly different sculpting experience and very different outcome. Really interesting and cool pros and cons in their own way, but both a lot of fun in their own way too. And it does bear mentioning, again, I have not been paid to say or do any of this stuff. I've literally had these packets of beta testing clay sitting around my office for months and never got around to doing anything with them. And when I decided what I felt like doing today, this was it, and it just so happened that their Kickstarter just went live. And if you're interested, go check it out. They definitely have my thumbs up, because as an outcome goes, I'm pretty impressed with both these things and look forward to working with them in the future. So definite thumbs up from me here. Also a shout out to Proco for making the cool skulls that I've worked with here today, and a huge thank you to you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure, of course, to like this video so other people can see it and enjoy it, and subscribe for more fun with art and creativity in all sorts of forms in future. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.
Subscribe. Do it. Yeah.